communities out on the reservation, and to be able to bring these smiles to school children who receive backpacks and school supplies from this youth council. In 2016, the Morningstar Youth Council advocated for a Native Youth Summit. They actually did the work of lobbying the Arizona State Legislature, really kind of working through the Native American Caucus, working through the Native state legislators who were serving at the time to try to lend some support for a Arizona Youth Council, a youth summit, which they've also gone out to try to raise additional funds to make this summit happen by learning how to do grant writing. So this is something that's still kind of new, this Youth Leadership Summit. They've been working in partnership with Unity and other kind of large, more national youth organizations, but I think it's been pretty outstanding to see some of the work that the youth themselves have taken on in terms of trying to advance these opportunities. So Jeannie Benally, when I was preparing this presentation, I thought it was interesting that it was very difficult to find photos of Jeannie Benally doing extension work. So you'll notice that she's not in a lot of the photos that I'm going to share with you. However, that doesn't surprise me because I've known Jeannie over the years to be very humble about the work that she does in the community, and someone who maybe doesn't do it so much for the press and the popularity, but more to, again, create some sort of positive inroad to do something meaningful for tribal communities. Again, just a little bit of background on Extension. I had to put this here because they changed their name. They used to be Reservation Extension, Indian Extension Program. And more recently, they're known as the Federally Recognized Tribal Extension Programs, FTTEP. As mentioned, Extension really kind of had its roots in an 1862 land-grant university partnership that was established by a legislative process, and basically it established a relationship between Indian nations and land-grant institutions. So here in the state of New Mexico, with New Mexico State being a land-grant institution, a lot of the extension work happens out of NMSU, and in Arizona, a lot of the extension work happens out of the University of Arizona in Tucson. So out in this case, I think Navajo is we're in an interesting position because Navajo, being geographically located where it is, Navajo has the opportunity or challenge, if you will, depending on how you look at it, of working with land-grant institutions in both Arizona and New Mexico. So people like Jeannie, Gerald Moore is the extension agent in Window Rock. They have the opportunity to work with extension specialists both at the University of Arizona and New Mexico State University. So extension, in short, again, really still has this focus in areas of agriculture education. However, I think the extension agents have been very effective in terms of modernizing what that means. And some of it has been this approach to indigenize some of these programs and to kind of take that idea of maybe a conservation program or a master gardener program, community garden initiative, but to really figure out how do we make this culturally appropriate for the community we work for. How do we build in that resonance so that it is appropriate for the community that they're serving. So this is just an example of some of the youth programs that happen through Extension. everything from 4-H and AmeriCorps to STEM programs. Extension has been really huge in terms of trying to encourage Native American youth to pursue higher education in STEM areas. A lot of that is through different kinds of science and kind of a pre-engineering program, different workshops and training programs that they do. And I think they've done a really great job of trying to advocate for that, particularly among young women who are part of Extension. They do youth livestock shows, school garden projects. Some of it is about traditional food preparation. In fact, this is a photo of New Mexico State Extension specialists running a blue corn mush class. They do courses, back to that. They do classes where they work with elders, they work with youth, members of families to talk about different kinds of traditional farming practices. They've worked with organizations like the Native Seed Search based in Tucson, Arizona, to try to sort of reintroduce traditional strains of corn, beans, and squash to different communities. And I really try to, a lot of what they do, I think, resonates with what we talk about in many of our academic circles in terms of food sovereignty. Some of the things that we advocate for in terms of revitalizing some of these traditional practices in regard to agriculture is exactly what we see happening through some of these extension programs. Something that is not part of Extension, but another program that I think is really noteworthy in terms of what it does is an organization in southern Arizona called TOCA. It's the Dalma Community Action Program, also a nonprofit, which again I think emphasizes the importance of including nonprofit organizations as partners in community building work. But TOCA over the years has done an amazing job of trying to revitalize, bring back interest for Dalma people in their traditional food. And some of that was initially to get people to relearn some of those agricultural practices, but they realized that it also had a very interesting side project in that when they were bringing elders out to get them to teach youth how to plant certain kinds of plants or to harvest food from the desert, that also created an opportunity where elders were teaching youth the appropriate songs to do those things. The appropriate songs or prayers to plant seeds, to harvest the food from the desert, to prepare food for the community. And in doing that, they realized that there's also this great benefit of revitalizing some of the language for that community. A third area where TOCA saw benefit was in terms of, again, re-emphasizing the importance of traditional foods as a way to combat some of the health issues, mainly diabetes in that area, and to try to promote healthy food choices for the community. So again, a lot of that is very similar to what we see happening in some of these extension programs. This is a photo from the Navajo Livestock Show every year at the different Navajo Nation fairs. Extension will help to host a livestock show where Native youth, Navajo youth in this case, have the opportunity to show the sheep or the lambs, the goats and calves, horses, so on and so forth, that they've been raising. And one of the benefits of that, the extension agents will say, is that it teaches responsibility when the youth take on that role of raising these animals. As in the case, I think when we talk about university partnerships, agriculture extension is definitely underlines that opportunity there. The history of the way ag extension was established, sets up this relationship between land-grant institutions and communities. But it's always interesting to me how few people know about extension. Or sometimes people think that it's kind of outdated because it has its roots in the late 1800s, or because the emphasis is on ag education, that sometimes people question the relevance of extension in, say, the year 2018. So the third story that I want to share with you is that of Dr. Carletta Chief, who is a professor, scientist extraordinaire at the University of Arizona. Some of you may also remember her from the time she served as Miss Navajo years ago. But more recently, I think when we talk about people, getting some attention for the work that they're doing in communities, she was out in the public a great deal as part of the response team when the spill happened at the Gold King mine. What I think is important about this story is, again, it's that opportunity for someone who comes from our community. Carletta is someone, if you ever get a chance to meet her, for those of you who know her, know that she's very much grounded as a Diné person. Someone who very much is rooted in what's important culturally and historically for our community. So for her to come from that perspective, but to also be, very talented in terms of what she does in the science realm, to be able to kind of marry those perspectives in terms of what she was able to do to help our community to respond to the spill, I think has had a tremendous impact. Again, there's a thread here where she's been doing some significant work in terms of that being linked to the next generation. She continues to head up a lab at the University of Arizona where she is mentoring students. No surprise that a lot of those students are Native American students, or that they're Navajo students, some of whom come from other universities to work under Carletta, to learn how to, again, bridge this disciplinary gap where we're kind of taking and maximizing those opportunities to use and learn what we can from science, but marry that with some of the ideology that comes from our cultural community. So these are photos of Dr. Chief with Vice President Jonathan Nez. ACES years ago had named Dr. Chief the Professional of the Year and put together this really great video that highlights some of the work that Dr. Chief did in responding to the mine spill. And a lot of that, again, emphasized how effective she was in terms of going out to different Navajo communities to sort of explain the science of what happened, to explain the science of the impact on water, and to explain the impact on soil that was adjacent to some of the waterways that were affected by the mine spill. Here we have a photo of Dr. Chief out in the field doing some of that testing, and then NAU PhD student Tommy Rock, who has been working under Dr. Chief on his own journey toward his PhD work. I really recommend, if you haven't seen it, there's a short video that you can see on YouTube called Bitterwater, Women in Science, that showcases work that Dr. Chief has done. And again, I think what's powerful about that is the emphasis placed on how she brings Navajo ideology, Navajo philosophy, and that groundedness as a Diné woman to what she does in her field of science. So the point I want to make with this paper, top of the list, is that community development is absolutely more than economic development. Again, I think some of this work, what has been interesting, has been trying to re-engage Native people, Native students who feel like development means that you've sold out. That if you're welcoming development, it means you sold out your people, or that you're signing on to something that probably isn't going to be good in the long run for the community. So what we're really trying to do, again, kind of working in that space between the disciplines, is to figure out how do we change up the language? How do we take control of some of these models and methods and processes so that they can actually be more beneficial, more useful, and more practical for what it is that we're doing in the area of economic development and community development for Indian country. Again, it invites partnerships from usual or unexpected places. This work with extension, I think, has been kind of interesting because at ASU, we are not the land-grant institution. Yet we have been working on some projects that, we have invited the University of Arizona, we've invited extension specialists who are looped in through Navajo Extension and the U of A to partner with us at ASU on something like Navajo housing. So a lot of what this work does is it really kind of encourages us to get out of our silos, get out of our ASU silo and work with U of A. I guess here the comparison would be to get out of your UNM silo and to perhaps work with New Mexico State University. I realize a lot of our universities have rivalries. I acknowledge that because I went to U of A, and when I took a job at ASU, people sent me some hate mail, in jest, of course. But I took a lot of ribbing from my U of A friends when I took a job at ASU, and again, sometimes honestly there is competition. As university units or as universities, we go after big dollar grants, and sometimes it means we're competing against that other university for a big dollar grant. But what we've been seeing, and I think the Navajo Generating Station is a great example, where when you're trying to work from that interdisciplinary angle, sometimes it means that you're even, unexpectedly, you're getting out from your university umbrella, and that you're working with partners that maybe people didn't think would have been your partners 5 or 10 years ago. So it's very reflective of, I think, this dynamic of the university and non-university partnerships that we're seeing out there, and that I think could help us to solve in a very pragmatic way some of the challenges that we have in our communities. A last point, again, I think some of this work should involve nonprofits. A lot of those nonprofits are in urban areas. But again, even that is reflective of the very important changing dynamic of a lot of our communities, and that we see a lot of families, youth, and our people residing in urban areas. I just heard a story the other day about someone who is starting a nonprofit in the area where I come from, at Oak Springs. Someone who received a huge sum of money to build a playground for the youth in the Oak Springs community, and that she tried going through the government channels, tried going through the chapter, tried going through youth services in Navajo Nation, and was met with all kinds of red tape. When she said all I wanted to do was to use this money to build a playground for youth in this chapter area. So she decided to start her own nonprofit. It was a way to kind of sidestep some of that bureaucratic red tape to build this playground. But people are being innovative in some of these ways that they're approaching these dilemmas in our community. So again, just to recap, coming back to comprehensive planning, a question here that I think is really important is how do we get the community involved? Planning, I think, is always kind of challenging in a lot of our communities. We associate it with the work of government. We figure our tribal council or our economic development committee, people like that will do planning for us. Something that we've been working a great deal on lately is trying to emphasize to people that, you are the community. That it's not just on the shoulders of your elected leaders or people who work in tribal administration, but especially if you have a gripe, if you have a complaint, you see something in your community that you'd like to see fixed, or you want to see something different in the next 25, 50 years, that an indigenized planning process can help to facilitate some of those things. Won't necessarily solve all those problems, but can help to be a framework that might be able to facilitate some of that. One of the very basic processes in planning is visioning. And it's always interesting to be in a group of, in a room full of Native people who are doing a visioning process, because that's where people get really excited. When you ask people, what do you envision for your community in 25 years? What would you like to leave for your kids and your grandkids in 50 years? And the lists are usually very long in terms of a lot of positives that people see. People recognize that although maybe there have been some horrible things that have happened to us historically, that there's still a lot of positive in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of pride of who we are as Indian people. So visioning, is always an interesting segue to a planning process, because it gets people excited about what it is that they want to preserve and try to have in place for those future generations. So the next steps, and this is something that I talk about in my paper, is the future of further interdisciplinary partnerships. At ASU, part of the language and the culture of our institution is a focus on transdisciplinary research. That's the buzzword. However, in American Indian Studies and Native Studies, we've been doing interdisciplinary research for a really long time. We appreciate being able to work with people who are coming from other perspectives and from other methodologies. We've heard some of those disciplinary perspectives today, and yet, even though someone might be coming from public health or sociology, so on and so forth, there's still a lot of common threads. There are a lot of common themes today, and I can see the connections that our work has in terms of being able to do something that benefits Indian people. So what we've been working on lately in blue are the areas, as I mentioned, I've been working with urban planning professors in recent years, trying to figure out how we put a planning class together. We've been doing a lot of writing in terms of trying to figure out the curriculum aspect of it. I've also been working with a colleague out of construction, engineering, and design, Wanda Della Costa, who is a Cree architect. And it's been very interesting to bring our students together, because Wanda has been very effective in reaching out to different Navajo chapters to create studio projects where the students work with community members and chapter officials to try to address some of their planning dilemmas. So it's been a great chance to get our students out in the community to talk to people about, again, visioning. What would you like to see in this community in the next 25 years? How do we put steps in place to figure out how to get there? Who's responsible to do certain things so that we can be where we want to be in 25 years. So it's been really interesting to work on this partnership, and my colleague, Dr. Marley, mentioned earlier that maybe I might talk about housing today. This is really where some of that work has been happening. And again, it's all very new, it's all still very much in transition, but for our students, especially when you come from social sciences where maybe there aren't a lot of opportunities to do applied research, that's an applied research opportunity. Because again, when we talk about Navajo housing, we talk about Navajo communities wanting to do something sustainable, wanting to do something different from HUD housing, communities that want to experiment with solar power. Those are chances that our students have to work with those families to generate ideas, to present some of those options to the communities. So in terms of the future, again, I think there is tremendous opportunity out there in terms of the next steps. Very likely partnerships are in social work, public health. At ASU, health innovations is inclusive of everything from nursing and dietetics to all kinds of exercise, sports science, you name it, all kinds of different aspects of health education. And a lot of that could have a direct impact on what it is that we're working on in terms of building communities out in Indian country. STEM fields are also a great opportunity for us. A lot of times people who are in STEM fields going after big grants need a social scientist on their project. And it's been the door opening a little crack to give disciplines like AIS or Native Studies that opportunity to partner with folks who do STEM work to, again, work a little bit more collaboratively and across those disciplines to generate work that hopefully is timely and practical and beneficial to our communities. So in closing, indigenized planning, I will argue, it really is that chance to tailor. A lot of that, I think, boils down to an approach. There still are some folks out there who say, well, urban planning, even the name urban planning doesn't really match who we are as Indigenous people. However, again, this is very much kind of working out there on the fringe of our discipline, and is an attempt to kind of peek out from our AIS Native Studies silo to figure out how is it that we might be able to partner with some of these other fields that have tools and technologies, processes that might be beneficial for some of the work that we're doing in Indian country. I will argue that indigenized planning gives us that chance to honor what's culturally important to us. Used proactively and not used against us, which sometimes historically it has been, where the federal government has done planning for us. Or sometimes, bureaucracy, our own tribal governments have done planning for us that as community members we felt like this wasn't really a good match for who we are or what we want on the local level. Again, flipping that, turning that upside down and really trying to put the grassroots in control of a planning process. Really putting local people in control of how a process happens or how the tools get tailored could be that chance to change what this looks like. I had a guest speaker in my class 2 days ago in my economic development class. Thea Walker is education and environmental specialist for Hale River Indian community. And she came in and talked about how the community is restoring wetlands to be able to preserve a population of eagles in the community. And I thought that was so amazing how she was talking about the importance of traditional knowledge and how, and very similar to the work of Carletta Chief, she's kind of marrying this idea of science and the environment and systems, ecosystems in the Hale River community, marrying that with this traditional knowledge. Why are these birds important to us culturally? What is the language that we use for certain kinds of birds or for a bird migration? You know, it was, you know, she's talking about the tools of planning. She's talking about adaptive planning, a notion that I know very little about, but from an AIS perspective, I appreciated that inclusion of the traditional knowledge aspect of it. To finish up, planning can really kind of empower us as we look out on that 25, 50, 75-year horizon. It really helps us to, in a practical way, perhaps figure out how to realize some of those things that we would like to see for our communities. So with that, I thank you.
Due to time, we're going to go ahead and go to our next speaker. However, Michelle will be available afterwards to ask any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hale, for sharing your words and research. Next, my name is Jessica Nolly. I am a mathematics major with a minor in Native American Studies. I will be graduating in the fall, and I am here to welcome Dr. Viola Cisnegini. She is Filipino and Diné. She is from the Torreon community of the Navajo Nation, as well as the Pueblo of Tamaya, where she is married. She is an assistant professor of Native American Studies at the University of New Mexico. Her research and teaching focus is nation building and decolonization through Indigenous education. She is passionate about her service to her students, education, and social well-being for all. Please help me welcome Dr. Cisnegini.
Good afternoon. I apologize for my cold. I'll do my best to get through the presentation as smoothly as possible. Yate, Sheke, the Auto, Shudine, Viola Sinigini, and Shek, Filipino Nishla, Tachini Mashashin, Filipino Nashache, Sitnigini Nashanala, Nat Nalshin, Nat Nasha, Rio Rancho de Chigan, the University of New Mexico de Nashnish. So thank you again. Thank you so much for staying. I know it's been a long day, but I feel very filled in the knowledge that was shared today. So hopefully this will help. Maybe I'll help. You guys can help me read some of these extended quotes that I have. But anyways, what I'm presenting today is, I think it's kind of like a collection of a lot of these ideas that were shared. Like we talked about, Native Studies is really interdisciplinary, and we present that in the best way that we can, and we hope that our students come away with a good grounding in nation building, and they can then think about their pathways really intentionally about what they want to do and where they want to go with that. So what I'm presenting today is some research